international law within Nigeria. So what this means is that our membership cuts across both lawyers and non-lawyers. We have people in international relations, international affairs, and anyone who has anything to do with international law, it's welcome to join the membership of the Nigerian Society of International Law. We hold conferences, we boost research, we engage in topical issues. And when we started this, some people accosted me actually and asked, why talk about Russia and Ukraine? And the answer, I'm sure the panelists are ready to bring on board today, because we believe that it has a direct impact on what is happening in Africa. So you can visit our website for Nigerians who are in diaspora. You're also welcome to be part of this foremost society that advances scholarship on issues of international law, international diplomacy, and international relations. So I'll stop here and hand over to Dr. Fokala to briefly introduce the African Network of Constitutional Lawyers. Dr. Fokala, please.
Can you hear me? Is that audible enough?
Yes, we can hear you.
Today has been a very busy day here in Victoria and at the University of Pretoria, but as usual, on our part, we are absolutely grateful to meet with colleagues in Nigeria and colleagues in different parts of the world. Just briefly, the African Network of Constitutional Lawyers has been around since 1997. And we are pleased to say most of our colleagues in Nigeria, and also I see from the association that you just presented now of international lawyers, are also most of them are part of the network. So we have been around since then, of course, not with me sitting here, but with a plethora of great professors that have been around this continent, and lawyers that have been supporting the network as well. We are the African hub of the International Association of Constitutional Lawyers. With some of you, we met in Norway during the International Association's meeting. We also met in Seoul, in South Korea. And some of you are also aware that we are hosting the World Congress here in South Africa in December at the University of Johannesburg from the 5th to the 9th of December. We collaborate with a lot of universities across the continent to showcase some of it and have conversations around issues around democracy, issues around constitutional building and designing as well. As we speak, we are on our way to Botswana, where we are collaborating with the National Democracy Institute in Washington to host a conference on feminism in the continent. And we are very lucky that we will have a strong show or representation from Nigeria. Yeah, former president will be attending. Jonathan, Goodluck Jonathan, I think so. Where that comes first. That will be attending the conference and a good host of former presidents as well. And in Namibia, we are also meeting there in August at the University of Namibia sometime later on in the same year, where we will also be hosting a conference where we look at issues around democracy and the free trade agreement in the continent. For us, conversations around Ukraine and the continent are very important. And what has happened now in Ukraine is particularly important for us to discuss because it is affecting us in many ways. For those of us who drive, for those of us who have the opportunity to see the way that this particular conflict has impacted our lifestyles, petroleum has gone so up. And the conversation is more central in the case of Nigeria. Why? Because this is a country that is also part of the OPEC countries that produces petroleum. Yet we are in a situation where as Africans, we are unable to have a say in the price and even benefit from some of these OPEC countries, which include Algeria, Angola, Congo, Equatorial Guinea, and so many of these countries. We suffer the effect of all these price hikes. This is what, for me, makes this conversation very important. Now we are able to find solutions that will be able to resolve these issues in our own beloved continent. the issue of wheat, which is also a consequence of what falls out from the Ukraine and Russia conflict. So we will strongly, the reason why we are part of this is because we think if we cannot at some point find solutions that are petroleum linked, that we should be able to find solutions that are constitutionally linked, that we as Africans can at some point start making our own decisions that will speak to get us out of the current price hikes and challenges that we are facing because of it. Nothing much to say, but just to say we are extremely pleased to be here. Thank you for inviting us as a network. I only represent a good host of people. We are almost about 750 members across the continent, in different parts of the continent as well. And so it makes it good that we are here now to support this initiative and ensure that we have a fruitful conversation. Thank you. And I will be with you throughout the event. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Fokala. Then I would have the privilege of introducing the moderator for the evening. She is Professor Yinka Omorobe, Senior Advocate of Nigeria. For those of us joining us from outside Nigeria, the rank of a Senior Advocate is the highest professional rank you get in the legal profession in Nigeria. She is a well-versed person, the former Attorney General of the Edo State. She basically needs no introduction, as we'll see going forward in this conversation. Professor Morobe, please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to really be here. But I think, Dr. Azubike, you need to continue and introduce the panelists who are all here.
Sorry?
You need to
Okay, I should go ahead and introduce the panelists.
all the panelists, yes, please.
Okay, okay. So I will start from introducing. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So in no particular order, I would introduce Professor Bola Akinterewa. Professor Akinterewa is a former Director General of the Nigerian Institute of International Affairs and currently the President and the DG of the Boli Tax Center for International Diplomacy and Strategic Studies. Next, we have Professor Lebakeng Josiah from the University of South Africa. We have Professor Dan Kwali. Dan Kwali is Chief of Legal Services and Judge Advocate General at Malawi Defense Force. And we have Dr. Tola Ilesomi. Tola is a research fellow with the Nigerian Institute of International Affairs. So this is just a brief introduction of the resume of the panelists we have today. And as you would agree with me, we have picked carefully our panelists today to ensure its spread of the African continent. I know some people would want to attack on the gender parity, but it is what it is. And at least we managed to ensure we have 2 women on board. So I would hand over now to the moderator to call on the first speaker and for the night to begin. Happy conversation, everyone.
Thank you very much, Dr. Azubike. I'm sure that everybody can hear. I just like to say that if at any point people don't hear, please let me know. You have the raise hand function and there's the chat. There's a chat function as well. And if there are any comments you want to make in the course of our discussions, the chat function is there as well. So I'm very honored to be part of this program, talking about a crisis that is actually of fundamental importance to the world, even though for Africa, I mean, we have our different positions on it, but you will see that the level of apathy here is quite significant, as highlighted by Dr. Azubike when he said that people asked him why we were actually talking about the Russia-Ukraine crisis. But it's quite good that Dr. Fokala has in talking about his association, actually talked about why we need to know a bit about it, irrespective of what our different positions are. So this year, we've basically had this crisis. On 24th of February 2022, Russia invaded the Ukraine, and the world was faced with a great challenge. And interestingly, we were still in the throes of the coronavirus pandemic. But this war had the effect of stilling all the noise about the pandemic. It's not that the pandemic went away, but the noise from the war was just much louder. So all the stuff about corona, masks, etc., went down to a great extent. So even now, the pandemic is very much still with us, but there's another challenge that the entire world is facing. Of course, we have to think about, why do we talk about it? Why is the crisis so important? Again, Dr. Fokala has mentioned the food crisis. As an energy lawyer, I naturally have to talk about the energy aspect and the great impact that it's having on energy. But before we really go on much, I would like to ask my distinguished panel just to give us some thoughts about, brief thoughts about their perspective of this crisis. We're very, very fortunate that we have very, very distinguished people. We have the first Vice President of the Nigerian Society of International Law, who is also a former Director General of the Nigerian Institute of International Affairs. We have very, very distinguished scholars from Malawi and from South Africa. We have as well a very distinguished scholar as well, who is also with the Institute of International Affairs. And so we know that we're going to get some really good perspectives. So I'd like to, first of all, ask, because I'm interested in the different country perspectives. It's a known fact, there have been quite a few articles about the attitude of Africans and the fact that Africans are lukewarm and have positively supported Russia as opposed to Ukraine. I'm one of these people that are always fighting against people talking about Africa. I really, really mind. I'm always reminding everyone that, please, Africa is not one lump sum. It's a continent that's the second largest in the world, and it has got 54 countries that are all very different. So there's nothing like an African position, I always like to say. Although even some people from the continent like to say Africa says or Africa is doing, I would say it's rubbish, really rubbish. We have 3 countries here. We have 4 eminent scholars here, and I think three countries represented here. So we'd like to know. So maybe I will start off and see, I'll start off with Professor Akinterua. In a few minutes, can you tell us what is your perspective about this crisis and why should we care? You are muted, Prof.
Okay. Yes, my president, how many minutes?
You have like 5 minutes.
Okay, 5 minutes. Well, let me first of all thank you and Azubike, and particularly for partnering, with a body that has the same objective as the Nigerian Society of International Law. The similarity in objective consists of the fact that international law regulates interstate activities for the purposes of maintenance of international law, international peace and security. Now there is insecurity as a result of the war. My disagreement is that everyone is talking about a crisis. I think it has gone beyond crisis. In polymology, it has moved from being a crisis to that of a conflict, with the potential to becoming a plurilateral or regional, war, with a characteristic feature of a conflagration, now destruction through fire. So it's no longer crisis. Crisis is just about when you are still seeking negotiation, you are looking for peace, without the use of force. But the moment it becomes a shooting war, you introduce hot battles, then it becomes a conflict in polemology. So in this case, when we are now assessing, for instance, what one's opinion about it is all, then if we do not agree that it's no longer crisis we are looking at, talking about impact, implications all along will be out of context. Again, my president, the senior advocate of Nigeria, used the word invasion. Now, invasion is the vocabulary of the Western world, the NATO and its allies. The Russian school of thought doesn't believe in that. Russia itself said they engage in special military intervention in Ukraine. Now, is a special military intervention not synonymous with invasion? An invasion, we do not really know. But this is why we are here and we are discussing. The elements are there. And perhaps more importantly, is this an international war? Is it an interstate war or a civil war? Because the beauty of it all is that the United Nations Secretary General has told the world that since the inception, since the establishment, the emergence of Ukraine in 1991 as a state, that Ukraine has not come out to register its international boundaries as distinct from its international frontiers with the United Nations. And we all know quite well that the basic 3 or 4 requirements for a state to exist in international relations and in international law will require having an effective government capable of translating, voluntarily contracted international obligations. You must also have a territory over which you are to, exercise your jurisdiction, your powers, and so on and so forth. And then you must also have a people. Even though a fourth school of thought has argued that, well, you may have territory, people, and government, that may not be sufficient in entering international relations until you are so recognized. But we have known quite well that, yes, countries can still exist as sovereign states, meeting the 3 basic requirements, the issue of people, government, and territory, but without having recognitions. When you don't have recognitions, you can still exist. So in this case, Ukraine has been internationally recognized without having its international boundaries already so registered. Now the issue is that it is only when your international boundaries are well defined, well delineated, that we now know where your boundaries are. And I'm positing here at the end of my 5-minute preliminary discussion to say that Ukraine, from the perspective of Russia, is still part and parcel of the Russian Empire, of the Soviet Empire. And Russia now is seeking to restore that Soviet Empire. That's why it called it special military intervention, but it will constitute an invasion if we consider that Ukraine has internationally recognized boundaries. I so submit respectfully.
Thank you very much. I think you started off on a very, very controversial point, because you are actually questioning the statehood of Ukraine. And as we're talking, I'm actually casting my mind back to the maps I've seen of Ukraine, where I've actually seen territory, and I'm not aware that the whole of the territory is disputed. But it's good. I think it gives a good perspective and shows that Africa has different perspectives. It's not necessarily just one Western perspective. And somebody has said Africa has a lot in common. We have more in common than we have differences. I agree completely. But, that is for us to say, not for the West to lump us all into one globe, so to speak. we really don't want or need that. I'd love to hear from Professor Kuwali, please, if you can tell us your perspective on this entire issue.
Recording in progress.
Professor.
Thank you so much, my elder sister Yinka.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, just to carry on from where the big brother, Professor Ankinero, has stopped, I would like to outline basically 5 things. So number one, I would call it war, though the Russians are calling it special military operations, but it's war nonetheless, because it has all the characteristics of an armed conflict. So the armed conflict between Russia and Ukraine, in my view, has impacted with regards to Africa on number one, international peace and security. That brings to the fore the role of the Security Council, which I will mention later in the discussions when it comes to solutions. Added to the Security Council, because Russia is part of the Security Council and therefore holding a veto power and rendering the council to be ineffective. So we can also trigger the role of the General Assembly using the United for Peace resolution. Number two, with regards to the fact that now globalization is commonplace, we are affected by refugee flow. It would be naive for us to think that the refugees will just be limited to Europe. With a war of that stature, we should expect refugees to even come to Africa. Added to that, we should think of our brothers and sisters from the African continent who have been trapped in the quagmire in Ukraine. As Sister Inka alluded to, energy has been affected because Russia is one of the biggest exporters of energy. Again, Ukraine is also a facilitator in terms of energy exports from Russia. Now, we've also talked about markets, especially the fact that the wheat exports in Ukraine have been crippled. We heard our brothers and sisters in Egypt complaining that they're no longer able to supply bread because the wheat imports from Ukraine have been crippled. We also know that we have a lot of imports in our countries of fertilizer from Eastern Europe, and Ukraine is one of the countries that are the biggest exporters of fertilizer. So that is also an impact, especially considering that many African countries are still agro-based. The economy of most of our countries are agro-based in nature, therefore dependent on fertilizer. So we've also been crippled in that regard. I'm sure you agree with me that almost each and every country on planet Earth has had fuel hikes of late. Of course, everyone is attributing it to the war in Ukraine. Added to that, once you increase fuel, that means the cost of everything increases. So that is a direct impact of the war in Ukraine. The third issue is that of mercenaries. In as much as the African continent has prohibited mercenarism, but we've seen that the war in Ukraine, especially on the side of Ukraine, and I'm pretty certain that even on the side of Russia, has had a mercenary. So a mercenary would be, as you're aware, would be a person who has no specific interest in the war apart from the monetary aspect. So he or she is not a citizen of any of the parties to the conflict. So they are motivated not by patriotism, but the monetary aspect. And we've seen even some brothers are fighting in Ukraine. So that is also another aspect which will have negative repercussions on the African continent because we've prohibited mercenarism. The fourth issue is that of human rights, because human rights are universal. Human rights have no boundaries. So the suffering of our brothers and sisters in Ukraine or even in Russia is also affecting us because we are all humans. Now, added to the aspect of human rights, you see war crimes. War crimes are universal in nature. They can be prosecuted by any country on the basis of universal jurisdiction. Related to war crimes would be crimes against humanity. So crimes against humanity, I'm sure we all lawyers here, we know what crimes against humanity are: serious violations of human rights, widespread against civilian population. And another aspect is that of a nuclear threat. Some would call it the threat of a third world war. Now, this threat comes in because Russia is a nuclear country. Now, if a nuclear country goes to war, chances of them triggering nuclear weapons as offensive or defensive weapons are very high. If they've been able to go to war, war is a failure of negotiations. What would stop them from pressing the nuclear button? So that's why you don't want a nuclear state to go to war. So threat of nuclear war or third world war, others are even calling it a colder war. You know, we had a Cold War which ended ideally in 1992, but now we're getting to a colder war whereby countries would have to align either with Russia or with the West. So we don't want to get to that situation. And we've already seen even divisions among East African countries in terms of alignment. I think at this stage I should stop unless you want me to provide insights on what should African countries do to resolve the conflict. But let me give opportunity to my colleagues. Thank you.
You'll actually thank you so much. We'll actually come round to that. I mean, you've talked about many interesting issues. Again, you highlighted energy and the food crisis. You highlighted mercenaries, which I found very interesting because they're all over Africa. We all know it's an open secret. They even had to move mercenaries from, was it Congo or somewhere, out because they needed them in that war. You've mentioned some things. I mean, human rights. Hey, the world is replete with human rights violations in every country, as we have seen, for example, in the United States, to give a perfect example. So it's interesting. One can see that there's so many sides. So, I mean, again, what's your perspective? I would like to thank you. We're going to actually come back to what Africa should do. Is there an African position? We will go round. So, Professor Joshua Leba-Keng, I hope I'm right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Am I audible?
Please, yes, very much so.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Omorobe. I'll join others also to refer to you as Ma, if you don't mind. Let me start by declaring my positionality for what it is worth. I am not pro-Russia. In fact, I have a historical beef with the country when it was still the Soviet Union, because it is my considered view that had the Soviet Union not decided to declare some sections of the liberation movement in Southern Africa, the struggle would have unfolded differently. But that is a discussion for another time. I'm raising this because I believe that the United States, the United Kingdom, and the European Union actually try to weaponize Africa against Russia. And they have also weaponized the war, not the tension, the war that is taking place, by basically imposing tough economic sanctions on Russia, including the removal of key Russian banks from the SWIFT financial system. I personally think these measures are not only aimed at crippling and crushing Russia, but they are also meant to cripple and crush those with relations, especially economic and military relations with Russia. From the point of view of international relations, I think there was a need for a balance that recognizes the sovereignty, whether it is a sovereignty in question, but the sovereignty of Ukraine and the security concerns of Russia. That is what the international community should have done. But because the objective was not so much to resolve the problem itself, that is why many other countries were weaponized. Now, as Africa, why are we concerned with what is happening? For me, there are fundamentally 3 to 4 reasons that we can look at. We would note that just before Corona, Africa was one of the continents that was basically developing very fast. Corona reversed all that. And as African countries were trying to address the aftermath of Corona, the war started. Now, our concern with this war is simple. Both Russia and Ukraine are major breadbaskets of the world. If you look at how many African countries rely on, and we will not get into the statistics, they are all over, so much has been written on these issues. Wheat, which is the staple food on the continent, the bulk of it comes from both countries. Sunflower comes from both countries. In fact, Ukraine, although an underdeveloped country, in terms of food, has been able to even feed a number of European countries. The second issue that we might want to look at, because the first one relates to how Africa will be affected in terms of food security. Not only because of high prices, but also because of lack of provision of those food, because everything has been sort of disrupted. The second issue that we might want to look at is that Russia has provided a number of African countries with small arms. You can list in 2020 major buyers of Russian arms: Algeria, Angola, Nigeria, Ethiopia, Sudan, Southern Sudan, Rwanda, Mozambique, and so on and so on. And that is only in 2020. Now, that is very important because it links with an area that we'll be discussing later on the impact on security on the African continent. Mm-hmm. The other area that we might like to look at is that several African countries have actually depended on Russia to combat insurgents in their own countries. The Wagner group is everywhere. You go to Mali, they are there. They are in several countries. The other issue relates to Russian oil companies, which are found in most African countries that are oil producing in terms of explorations. Now, all this forces us as Africans, and of course I will use for now Africans as a common position, but we are going to dissect whether Africa has a common position, as some of the questions were raised. Now, all these issues, maybe just a minute more, all these issues have actually made African countries to be very skeptical. If you look at the position of Africa in the United Nations Security Council, with all the three countries, Gabon, Ghana, and Kenya, voting for the resolution to sanction Russia, you'd actually think that was the position of Africa. But in reality, when we went to the United Nations General Assembly, look at how the vote split. You had 28 countries voting for the resolution, and the rest, out of 54 countries, voted against or abstained, which speaks to the fact that, one, as we discuss, we need to avoid homogenizing the continent, because in terms of the practice of statecraft, each country always looks at its interest. And we will discuss this at a later point. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your interesting perspective. Thank you very, very much. Like you say, we will come back to that and to the African-wide position. So, Dr. Fokala, please, could you let us hear what your perspective is? And I believe you are from Malawi.
No, actually, you might be surprised to hear that I'm from Cameroon as well.
Cameroon.
Yes,
okay.
But actually based here at the University of Pretoria.
Oh, Pretoria.
Yes. So for me, it is a conversation that other African states or other heads of states might have their own politics. The issue of geopolitics that plays out in this space is also very interesting, because we have different blocks that we belong to. South Africa, for example, argues it based on the fact that they want to continue licking their hands, so we might want to speak, on both sides. So they are part of BRICS, and they are also a strong group within the AU, and also a strong role player within the international law framework. So they will not completely criticize Russia because of BRICS, and they will stand on the fence so that they don't criticize the international framework, because they're a strong player within the UN and the EU as well. Some people have criticized the reason why Sall, Senegal, the president of Senegal, went on to Russia in order to negotiate issues around grains and wheat. Personally, I felt like we should have also looked into ourselves to recognize the fact that if we have been categorized and recognized as a country, or a continent rather, with healthy soil and able to do good farming, do we need to continuously rely on wheat coming on from Ukraine or from Russia in order to have good bread, or in order to have good meals in our continent? No, we can also, in the same way that we encourage the farming of cotton, now we can start encouraging the farming of Ukraine, of wheat rather. What I've also said, and I strongly believe in it, is that we can always at any time make lemonade out of lemon, which is not really a good fruit to have. But the moment you turn into lemonade, then you are able to consume it with happiness. In the situation where we are, instead of rushing to Russia, trying to find or to rely with what the West says or what whoever says, is that this is an opportunity for us. And that is why we are here now to say, what can we do as a continent? One, to make use of the OPEC countries that we have. I've heard the issue of arms and arms being bought from different parts of the world. Yes, we agree. At the same time, if we have these negative effects, we also have to take advantage of the fact that we have several countries across the continent which are petroleum producing countries. Trade within ourselves is not really, to be honest with you, is not a very, very fruitful ground in this continent. The issue of reliance, believing on the fact that we can import petroleum from Nigeria, for example, or Cameroon importing petroleum from Nigeria and all that, is still not a very peaceful ground for us. We believe that we can easily do trade with the West. And that is why most African countries have a lot of connections with the West. We do not have a lot of intertrade within ourselves. Last week, I was in Addis Ababa, where we had a conversation around some of these issues. And one economist, he's not a lawyer, one economist, and it's good to learn other perspectives, actually made a very good point. He said, for us to start issues around intertrade countries, our continent, let's start by accepting our currencies. In other words, if I leave from South Africa with the South African rands and I want to spend it in Nigeria, I should be able to spend that money in Nigeria. And then probably because I'm in Nigeria, I get a naira as a change, which is something that happens in the Scandinavia, where you can get into Norway with euros and then get the krona as change. So trade within ourselves is something we have not really encouraged. And at the moment, we are caught with the proverbial saying that we are caught with our pants down because we have not really understood the fact that petrol can be imported from Algeria, from Nigeria, in order to satisfy the things that we, as Africans, we want to benefit from. We shouldn't be in the same situation like other countries that have fuel crisis. Europe doesn't have much to offer. And that is why Germany is having all these crises, because they are not really part of a petroleum producing country or continent or the country itself. But we have many others. And if we can, from here, encourage intertrade within ourselves, we will definitely be in a better place, either after this webinar or at the end of the year or maybe in a few years to come. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I think, yes, you're talking about the opportunities, and I'll come back to that. And of course, these opportunities differ as well. Depending on whether you're an oil producer that has used its oil wisely, you're one that has not, or you're one with zero. Thank you very much, Dr. Elesami. It would be very nice to hear you. I went around my screen, by the way, and that is how I have.
Okay, no problem, Prof. Good evening, Prof. Thank you. Good evening, co-presenters. Let me start by saying that I want to appreciate the organizers of this seminar for having me. So my topic is a bit modified from the general topic that we're looking at here today. I'm looking at how the impact of the Russia-Ukraine war on women's security in Africa.
No, you will come to that later. Give me your perspective on it generally. Yes, give me that. Yes, I will ask you from when we're going to talk about security, and then I want to hear. But what is your perspective? Is it important to us? Is it not important to us? Is it something we should ignore or not ignore? Does it make a difference to Africa? Some believe it doesn't. Ukraine is thousands of miles away, but some people have talked. I mean, all the wheat-dependent people are shaking right now, but like Dr. Fokala has said, there's an opportunity to grow wheat as well. So what is happening? What is happening? It will be good to have a women's perspective later when we will talk about security and bring it up then.
Okay, fine. Well, for me, if it's the general perspective, for me is like, of course, the war affects the world. Africa, it cannot be out of it. Even though we're not in the theater of war as it is.
Your internet is shaky, I think. Maybe you turn off your screen, it might help. Hello? Well, it's sort of gone
she
on.
has been.
Hello?
Can you hear me now?
Now, yes. So can you?
Can you hear me?
Yes, please go on.
Okay.
Yeah. It has gone off. So I think when she comes on, she will be able to talk at this point. But I would like to ask, is there, I mean, we have widely divergent, well, different countries, so to speak, here. Professor Akinteriwa, is there a discernible continent-wide position or sub-regional positions? And should there be, that is when we are considering the Ukrainian war and its impact on us?
From available data, there is nothing to suggest that there is any regional, sub-regional, and continental position on this matter. And as one of my colleagues rightly pointed out earlier on, when you look at the character of the voting at the United Nations General Assembly, you will discover that many countries acted individually, beginning with Nigeria. Nigeria is on record, if not the first, to be the first country to align in this particular matter. By that time, Nigeria's foreign minister, Onyema, told the government of Russia to withdraw its troops from Russia. And this was before the voting in the United Nations. Even before the voting, Nigeria has a policy of non-alignment. The meaning of non-alignment in this case does not require supporting one against the other. Non-alignment is that the position to be taken by Nigeria must be sovereignly taken. It must be in Nigeria's interest. So in this case, Nigeria acted unilaterally. We can assume that it is because of our national interest. But the issue there, you, President, Professor Omorogbe, you rightly pointed out that there is no one Africa. Because for me, in my conceptual clarifications here, we have Arabophone Africa, we have Lusophone Africa, we have Francophone Africa, we have Anglophone Africa. This is just differentiating on the basis of language alone. Now, when you are looking at it differently, we have Africa south of the Sahara. This is a geopolitical classification. And when you look at it, in terms of Article 1D and Article 1E of the 1991 Abuja Treaty, establishing the African Economic Community, each region has been holding different positions. A typical example will be the EPA, Economic Partnership Agreements between the ECOWAS and the European Union. Ditto for other sub-regions. So when you bring this one to this Russo-Ukrainian war, the issue is simple there, that it has not been possible for the African Union as a body to hold a position, and the reason cannot be far-fetched. Please, the United States currently in the Congress, efforts are being made to pass a bill. I think it's either in the second or third reading. The United States want to sanction, to punish on a very serious basis all countries that have voted against the UN resolution seeking to condemn Russia. So in this case, you will now see that at the end of the day, the big powers, like I think it's my brother, the back end, if I'm not wrong, who was talking about the strategic objectives of these countries. Left to me, the war a priori is not between Russia and Ukraine. It is a war between Russia and NATO and its allies. On the other hand, that's the starting point. If we do not agree on this, when we are discussing the implications, the security implications, we will not agree, but psychology of human differences also will allow for that. And even when we are talking about security, when my colleagues have been talking about one aspect, they've been talking about food security. They've been talking about humanitarian security. I want to agree with all these things, but the issue is that when we are discussing impact, when we come to that, you will discover that the position of African countries, either from the perspective of BRICS, perspective of being members of the AU, please, the colonial content, the colonial impact, the position of our former colonial mentors have never allowed Africa to stand by one policy. It's not. Look at it now. China will have a dialogue with the whole of Africa as a body. France will have a dialogue with the whole of Africa. The United States will have a dialogue, one country versus 24. When do 54 countries amount to one? So you see, at the end of the day, Prof, the question you ask is a very complex, a very difficult one. Do we have a common position? When have we ever had any common position that had not been influenced? And when, for instance, one of the colleagues raised the issue of mercenaries, and you rightly pointed out that Africa is already a terra cognita for all these mercenaries, etc. But the beauty, the implication of raising the issue of mercenaries is that that issue of mercenaries is the one creating a fundamental difference between France and Francophone Africa as a whole. Because now the Russians are the one providing mercenaries in Mali, in Chad, and now on the basis of that, France said under no circumstance would they accept partnering, cooperating with Mali because of the physical presence of mercenaries that enjoy support of Putin. So in terms of security, when we are going to discuss that, coup d'etats, Francophone countries are now saying, look, France, please, we don't want you anymore. And I wish that any one of us will have time to read, to go through this YouTube for Through My Eyes by Professor Bolagi Akiyemi every Thursday. He had addressed some critical issues of this matter there, relevant to us. So this is why we must thank both the NSIL president and our co-sponsor for bringing this issue, because this war is no longer a bilateral war. It's going beyond plurilateral war, regional war, to becoming a global war. And this is how we in Africa must begin to look at that. I thank you respectfully.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for your perspective. Yes, is there an African position? We differ so much. Professor Lebakeng, what do you think? You know, you talked as well about the different crises as well. I would like to know, how do you see the crisis has affected energy security? It's affected food security. You will agree as regards that, right? Are there other aspects of security that you think it has affected too?
Okay, thank you very much. I think for me, there are always three aspects of security that we should look at. We have focused a lot, and of course, even many analysts have focused a lot on the issue of food security, and understandably so. But I think we should go beyond just food to look at the totality of human security, because then that begins to include a number of aspects, which really those aspects are at the foundation of the United Nations Charter about, you know, the ability not to want, fear. We must be free from want. And if we have abundance, then we will not be in a problem. So it's not just food, but there's also energy and many other aspects. The second area for me is national security. And the third is state security. These are the three, what I normally call 3 dimensions of African security landscape. Because if you look at them like that, you'll then understand also why different African countries take different positions. Because in terms of impact of the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, African countries are not impacted in the same way. We have already said there are those that rely on the Russians in terms of, you know, small arms and so on and so on. There are those that rely in terms of food and so on. So the impact will never be the same. And the responses of Africa, which are highly calculated, you know, responses, will always differ. I think for me, what is currently happening is that in terms of human security, prices, you know, of goods, you know, increasing and being disrupted. We are now living with that. But the other 2 aspects, which is national security and state security, I consider them as near future risks rather than immediate security threats. And there's a difference in terms of human security. Already there is a threat. But in terms of national security and in terms of state security, what we are experiencing is still to come, because currently we are still in a state of risk, not actual threat. And this relates to the issues.
So, sorry to come in. So you are saying that the Ukraine crisis is going to impact on our national security at a point?
It will impact on not all the countries, some countries, and it will impact also on some countries' state security. Because let's deal, for instance, with the issue of state security. If we look at state security, most African countries are very fragile and very vulnerable. Now, Russia was selling arms to these countries. And part of the reason why Russia was, most African countries went the route of Russia had to do with the conditionalities of human rights that are always put by the Americans, by the United Kingdom and the EU, which, as we know, is very hypocritical, because they sell the same arms to countries that are very oppressive. But when we, for instance, you'll recall as a Nigerian how Americans refused to sell Nigeria arms. And that is why Nigeria ended up taking the route of, you know, Russia. So the vulnerability and the fragility of some African countries in terms of defending their own state will be, a thing in the near future. When people cannot get food, they become anxious. And that is when we find the military taking over. But there is also something that we have to look at. Most African countries right now are supposed to be spending on social services for people. But because there is also a problem of borrowing, which they are now facing, you note that comparatively, Africa is now paying more when it borrows than any other region in the world. And what happens? Most African countries don't borrow. The little that they have, where does it go? It will go to the military. It will go to intelligence, because the state has to be protected. So the fundamentals of human security, state security, and national security becomes major concerns for African countries. And I bet you most African countries will always make sure that they protect the state before spending its own human security.
So
and that is,
sorry, you are actually saying that the Russian crisis will exacerbate national and state security issues. I just want to ask you that before I ask somebody else something. Prof, I will call back to you soon.
I said human security already is exacerbated.
Now by
human security already in Africa. Yeah. Increases in prices, energy problems that we are living with right now. Okay, but so I'm saying the other two.
You're equating the energy, yeah, you're talking about the impact on our
energy security is part of human security.
Okay, so in the same
energy security,
global war has impact. Okay,
it has already.
Okay, thank you.
So the other two are still near future risks.
Okay, if the crisis or the war,
if the war continues, okay, they are near future risk, but the other one already a threat. Okay. That is the distinction that I make.
Okay, thank you.
Conceptually.
Okay, thank you, Prof. I'll come back. I can see Professor Kintra has raised his hand. Well, I'll come back to you. I'd really like to find out from Professor Kuwali what his position is about the security, how African security is impacted. What are your perspectives on this?
Yeah, I think my colleague have said it.
Which of your colleagues? Professor Joshua? Hello? I think his internet is frozen. Maybe while we're waiting for him, Prof, if you can talk for 1 minute before Professor Kuwali comes, Professor Akinterwa.
Yeah, thank you. It's just to essentially agree with my brother Joshua Lebaking on 3 grounds. Ground 1 is to say that the war as it is, whether it is continuing or not, it already has the potential to generate proxy wars, because the Ukrainian president has been appealing to Africa to give active support to Ukraine, not to buy, anything like grains, food from Russia, that they are not only stolen from Ukraine, but that in this case, they have digital technology and they are prepared to sign a bond with African countries just to secure African support. Russia is already looking at it to say, well, if you are not with me in the spirit of Jesus Christ, you are against me. And already is about to sanction Nigeria Now, Russia accepted in 2019 to help complete the Ajakuta steel industry. That one is at stake. The second point why I want to agree with Labour King is that he's talking about potential risks. No, I disagree with him on that one. It's no longer potential, it's no longer a risk. It's already a manifestation. Weapons manufacturers the world over are never happy that there are no wars, there are no conflicts. There must be conflicts so that they are able to sell their weapons. So in this case, it is not in the interest of any weapon manufacturer the world over that the crisis to conflicts, the war, comes to an end in the immediate. This is where the national interest comes in. And more importantly, is the issue of countries that are already buying small arms or provided by Russia. Now you cannot have small arms here and there. We were told by a colleague there that Russia has been very helpful in terms of fighting insurrection. But this is a truism. Now you can't have this type of situation on ground. And then you will not have NATO countries, Ukraine on the one hand, seeking our support, and Russia will be there. For as long as Russia will want to restore the Soviet Empire, Russian Empire, by all means, order and counter order will always amount to an encounter and disorder. And with the disorderliness, Africa must now prepare for the impact in implications for security. And this is the danger. I think Lubakeng is quite right to foresee the future troubles for Africa. That's why I raised up my hand to give him active support on that.
Thank you, Prof. I'd like to hear Dr. Fokala has his hand up. I guess you're going to speak to this issue. And then I'll come to Dr. Elesomi, who I think is up and about now, I hope. Yes, please, Dr.
So just to add that even though I agree with what Professor Lebakeng has said and what has just been supported, I want to disagree on one thing. And what I want to disagree on is his comment of the fact that we shouldn't bother about food insecurity. It is threatening lives already. So if security is something that we have to look at, the poor African person on the ground really doesn't bother about much on that aspect, or whether the influx of arms or not. What we care about, food is very, very important to us. Food is very important to our own being. And even in times of war, or when people do transact in arms transactions, food is also part of that. Because without food and the energy that you need to do all these transactions, you will likely be unable to do it. So for me, I do not see it at that point as anything that we should ignore, because it is here with us. What we foresee is the insecurity. That is fine. We can deal with that when we get there, or maybe avoid it at the moment. But what we are currently facing as a continent is the issue of food, and which is affecting us, and the prices that are increasing, and petroleum that is affecting our lives right now. And that is what we need a solution for. Thank you.
So even though, thank you. So I was actually going to address the question of opportunities to you as well. Did somebody talk?
But can I please?
Yeah. Oh, yes. Because he has talked a lot about opportunities in the past. But please come into this conversation.
Ma, can I come in and just point out one thing?
Yes.
That I'm the last person to say food is not important. In fact, I didn't say that.
No, you didn't say that.
I didn't. So yeah, okay. Because I consider food not as a soft security issue, but as a central issue. Hence, when we have food insecurity, security, I see that affecting both state and national security, because when people are hungry, I see the influence of lack of food as very important. So for me, I'm the last person to say food is not important.
We do know that, yes.
Thank
so
you,
I
thank
want
you.
to ask Dr. Fok, well, maybe I'll come back to you on opportunities. I want to hear from Dr. Ilesomi, who I think we have now. You were talking about a gender aspect to the Ukraine crisis.
Yes, thank you, Prof. Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes, we hear you.
Sorry, my network or internet had issues. I wanted to talk about the impact of the war on women's security in Africa, but you had said that before I say that, I should look at what was my position on Africa and the war. Well, let me join some of my colleagues that have earlier said that, well, I believe Africa does not have a single position in this war, and that has been played out with, of course, the vote to the UN General Assembly and some other positions that Africa has taken. And I think this is based on each country's engagement or relationship with Russia. That has, to a large extent, dictated either they were pro-Russia or pro-Ukraine. And I also think Nigeria also has taken its decision based on that as well. So there's no single African position, and I don't think we'll probably have that. Also, based on what you had said, that there's no single, Africa is not a homogeneous country, so to speak. We have our differences, although we have similarities. And so based on where we're coming from and our relations with Russia over the years, I think this, and of course our national interests, I think this has dictated whatever positions we're taking vis-a-vis this war. So that's my position on that. Then to look at how, I don't know if I granted the permission to look at how this war has impacted or is impacting women and girls in Africa. Prof. Mark.
Go on for a few minutes.
Okay, well, just to say that somebody mentioned the issue of food. Food is so critical, and the high cost in food and fuel and fertilizer is negatively impacting Africa, even though Africa and Africans are not in the theater of war as it is, but to a large extent, and we have felt it. If we take our minds back to the Arab Springs in 2011, remember very well then in Tunisia, it was because of high cost of food that Arab Spring actually took off in Tunisia. So of course, food plays a huge role in this crisis and how it affects women. For me, women have been negatively impacted by this war. It's so unfortunate because before this time, women, the COVID-19 crisis, COVID-19 pandemic, issues of violent conflicts, of climate change challenges had affected Africa, and women to a large extent were bearing the burden of this crisis. It was affecting them, has been affecting them very negatively. If you all know, I mean, women, there's a theory that says poverty has a feminine face. And so women, they constitute the poorest of the poor in Africa. And this war has only gone ahead to exacerbate and intensify the challenges that women are facing. The high cost in food prices, the high cost in energy prices, or even fertilizers has greatly affected women and how, the households, women, I mean, their households are taken care of and all that. Research has shown that.
So it's affected women over and above men.
Yes, in several ways. Maybe when I begin to highlight that, because beyond impacts of war on women and girls, for men and women, they suffer deaths, they suffer injury, loss of income, loss of lives, displacements, and all that. Women and girls go ahead to experience what is called widespread sexual-based violence. Women go ahead for instance, women suffer
as a result of the Ukraine war, because COVID, for example, impacted negatively on women in that way, without a doubt. But like the food shortage now, I want to know what is the extra pressure on the woman from the war. Is it the extra pressure that is normally in society, that the woman feels because she does the bulk of the world's dreary work and is the least paid?
The war itself has gone to worsen this situation. Of course, we know that women suffer these problems generally in conflict times and even in peace times. But this war has exacerbated the impact, the plight of women and girls. A typical example is even because of the high cost of food, of running homes and households, of fertilizers and hunger has increased the poverty level of women. There has been an increase in early child marriages has been on the rise as a coping strategy. Families have had to give out their, particularly girl children, of course, at this time, to cope with this hunger, to cope with the increased poverty that it is beginning to have on women and their families. This has also led to transactional and survival sex. A lot of women, because we know that, like I said earlier, poverty has a feminine face. Women face heightened levels of poverty because of the limited economic opportunities that they have. And so, like we said, Africa is coming out from poverty, heightened levels of poverty, COVID-19 challenges. We're coming out of violent conflicts in some parts of Africa that has, either segregated women, so to speak, to very heightened levels of poverty. And so this war, with the increased, levels of food costs and food shortages, has only gone ahead to worsen the plight of women and girls. So, of course, you see women now having to bury. I was reading, there was a research I was going through that in East Africa, Ethiopia, women are beginning to bury their infants and children due to malnutrition. Already, famine is
from the Ukraine war, which started in February. That is just
already. No, this is, of course, the Ukraine war is heightening it, is worsening the plight. Because, of course, we know that we already had famine and drought issues before. But the Ukraine war, with the high cost of price of food and food shortages, is worsening the plight of women and girls. And so, for instance, if we are having even early child marriages are on the rise. Of course, this is a gradual thing, but we're beginning to see it now. It's beginning to show that this situation, the war is heightening the stage and worsening the plight of women, particularly as increasing the poverty level of women.
Okay. Thank you. I'm sorry. I mean, I will probably say that in maybe year or two, you will be able to substantiate this better. But between February and now, statistical data may not work because, again, what has been caused by COVID and what has been caused by worsening development indicators, what has been caused in places like Nigeria by some economic policies we have in place, is very difficult to take away from. You can't really say that Ukraine has done some things where there's some dangerous policies. I will venture to say that later on we might be able to say that, but I would like to come back to this, or come back to some other observations. In the time here, I want us to say to actually talk about opportunities, and I want to start with, I don't know, people are dropping off, but they're not able to come back. I'm wondering, George, while we're talking, can you contact the different people who have dropped off somehow to see if they're trying to come back and cannot come back? Because I cannot.
I'm on it already. I'm trying that already. Also,
you are trying. Okay, because I really wanted us to talk about opportunities. What are the opportunities we see in Nigeria, for example? I really don't see why we should be moaning about wheat when we have cassava and we have other things that we can eat. I dispute wheat being a staple food because before wheat we were eating and we were doing things, and I think the same applies in many other places. I can see opportunities for my country, and as an energy lawyer, one of the tragedies is that we are not making a bomb and running to the market now because we are the tragic position of being a producer that is importing. So we are feeling the brunt of everything that's happening in the non-oil countries. But otherwise, we would have opportunities. But I could see that Dr. Fokala talked about opportunities. And I just wonder whether we can talk about some of this, because every cloud has a silver lining. What's the way for us? What is the
You
way
are right.
for us?
You are right.
Yes, so I mean, I'd like to like throw it open. I would have specifically asked him to talk first if he was on already. But I would like to throw it open.
Yeah, I can begin with
I don't
the
want to talk after.
discussion on, okay.
Go on, please.
Okay, I can go on with the discussion of the opportunities.
Yes, please.
Good. If we look at the Russo-Ukrainian crisis this time from the perspective of energy, especially supply of gas to Europe, when the European Union decided to go to its fifth or sixth level of sanctions, putting December as the time limit beyond which they will no longer have anything from Russia. Russia decided that, okay, there's no need waiting until December 2022. Russia decided now to say, okay, I will no longer supply to you gas. You, Germany, etc. along. This prompted the direction towards Israel. Israel now has done an agreement with the European Union to be supplying gas, and with the possibility of using Egypt as the transit country. Now, Egypt is geopolitically located in Africa. When we are talking about opportunities, this is just gas. Nigeria has gas in abundance, more than crude oil. The issue now is that, like Israel, we need to put the infrastructural needs in place to enable the export of gas from Israel to Europe. The opportunity also exists for Nigeria either to work more seriously on this trans-Saharan.
Yes.
Yes.
Pipeline, yes, okay. Sorry,
The
did you
pipeline.
say gas from Israel to Europe or gas from Europe to Israel?
That is gas from Israel to Europe.
Israel to Europe.
Yes. So they are working on it. The agreement was done just last week, I think. They are discussing it.
From our perspective, we should be thinking about the Trans-Saharan pipeline. There's actually a lot of talk in our oil industry as regards that as well. That's true.
That's quite doable. Then again, someone has suggested that, look, in fact, it is you, Professor Morobe, who said, look, what prevents us from looking at other staple foods? Why wheat? We have cassava, we have that. This was put in place by General Olusegun Obasanjo during his time. We were exporting that. So any crisis situation has positive and negative impact.
Yes.
So where some countries suffer, some will gain. So our own is to put some strategic economic policies in place while we are sympathizing with those who are suffering, etc. along. We must also seek to replace the way Israel quickly decided to replace Russian supply. I think that's one lesson from here. There are many things
that we can pick. Thank you. Because of time, I want to listen to Dr. Fokala because he talked a bit about opportunities. Have you something to say on that? You're back, I think.
Yes, I am back. Unfortunately, speaking now while on the road because I lost my charger, but it's fine. So I would just to say that I do agree with some of the comments that have been given in terms of us finding opportunities in the continent. But we also have to look amongst ourselves and some of the crops that we grow. And we do not, maybe, you know, there was a mention of cassava. Can we make bread out of that? Yes, we can. Can we make bread out of sweet potatoes? Yes, we can. But all of these issues have been completely ignored, in the sense that if we do not have wheat to have the bread that we have been fed with, either from France or all these countries, then we are not having bread. But if we are able to feed ourselves from the very substances and the things that we grow behind our yards now, then we can benefit from this war, you know, in that sense. One other example, which I think I can also throw in the basket, which Russia has also done now, given the fact that its relationship with Europe is being severed, is that Russia has actually repurposed McDonald's. It has repurposed McDonald's services and given it its own name. That is how we can repurpose some of the things that we feed on, bread and all whatnot, and use cassava. But I can tell you one thing, just as you started from the beginning, Prof. If we make cassava in West and Central Africa, that's where the consumption would end. Because in Southern Africa, they don't know what cassava is.
Oh, really?
If we make, yes. So you get into other parts of the continent, you will see that some of the staples that we have in West Africa or in Southern Africa as well will just end there. And if you tell someone down south that let us have sweet potatoes bread, the question will be, what is that? So in order for us...
For my clarification, and maybe some other people's, you mean that they eat only wheat? That's their only staple food?
Well, I'm waiting for Professor Lebakan to also confirm this. That I'm trying to say now is that the issue of cassava, for example, if I want to eat cassava in this part of the world, I really have to invest a lot of time and money to look for cassava, because it is not a common produce that is here, and it's imported from different African countries. We do not have cassava.
Okay.
So all these things that we do have in different parts of the continent, that great parts of the continent, I'm very convinced that if we are able, in the same form of accepting our currency by feeding on the things that we can produce, then we are able to survive this before it gets any worse. Because Russia will ensure that it trades with those who have the deep pocket to trade with Russia in terms of wheat. And not Africa, all African countries have that ability to do that. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We now have a little bit less than 30 minutes, and I want to throw open a bit so we can interact. We have different comments. We have, first of all, we have a question. Somebody says, what is the essence of the UN organization where members cannot express their positions freely in the case of the superpower, in the face of the superpower among them? I wonder whether the person who wrote it is alluding to the fact that certain countries had to run away, basically abstain, or be absent conveniently during the vote. Does anybody have a comment on that? I mean, I would say there's a lot positive about the United Nations, notwithstanding that aspect of human nature. If anyone has comments, yes.
Well, you see, abstention does not mean non-action.
Yes.
Abstention itself is a positive action. The only thing is just that, look, this time you do not want to say yes, you do not want to say no. Affirmation, positive affirmation. For instance, when I raised the issue of non-alignment, Nigeria's foreign policy of non-alignment, many people wrongly misunderstand that, meaning that, look, you cannot belong to this group, you cannot belong to that. That's not the meaning. Foreign policy non-alignment in the context of Nigeria, as espoused by Nigeria's Prime Minister in 1960, Tafawa Balewa, it simply means the sovereign right to determine whether to align, whether not to align. It's as simple as that. So when you are voting, you either vote for, you either vote against, you either abstain, and the abstention is of many types. Abstention is not just casting your vote. It is also refusal to attend. When people want to escape not being seen as a friend of one and enemy of the other, they will not even go to that particular voting session, so that we will not be able to categorize their position as supporting or not. Then they can give you diplomatic illness for their abstention. But in this case, what surprised the United States, the NATO and its allies, is the number of African countries that refrained from condemning. People do not want to condemn Russia simply because of their own national interests that are at stake. So abstention here is an expression of protecting your own national interests. So it's not necessarily a zero non-action. If, as you rightly pointed out, Prof, United Nations is on record to have done a lot. But at the same time, the question being raised is still valid. Many members cannot talk. 99 countries can vote yes. It is sufficient for one country to neutralize it with veto power. Okay. So at the end of the day, many countries know quite well that if a veto power has interest in this matter, why waste your time to go and cast a negative vote when you know it will be neutralized?
Thank you, Prof.
So these are some of the issues there. And when you look at UN Charter, section 108, 109, which provides for unanimity before you can review the UN Charter, it has been difficult because that unanimity will not be there. And basically, to just summarize that one there, yes, please.
So we can go on to the next, the questions from other people.
Yes, because you see, this issue of permanent membership of the UN Security Council, why is it dragging? It's simply because of that. So people cannot talk. So you have an organization whereby if you are powerful, you have the means, you talk. When you don't have the means, you don't talk. And more importantly, the principle of weighted.
Let me move on so we can move.
Okay, please move on.
Like if you talk about that, then we can go into so many things, because we know that in the Security Council, supposed abstention or absence has been used. But I want to leave this because there are people with comments to make. Yes, the first comment I will acknowledge was made by Dr. Raji, the first one. Now, some people have comments. I think if we could see them, I can see certain certain persons. I'm opening up for comments. I think there is Ibrahim. You are here. You want to talk, right? Yes, please.
Yes. Good evening, everybody. And I'd like to thank distinguished eminent professors and colleagues, son of the African soil, for the contribution which has been made so far. So I think the prof just took it out of my mouth. It's time the African continent started looking at our own national interests. Just like after the whole dust settles down in terms of the gas supply that Russia is making to Europe, Europe is going to look for emerging markets to diversify their gas supplies. So that's where the Trans-Saharan gas pipeline comes in. So the earlier the Nigerian government started doing it, construction of the Trans-Saharan gas pipeline, the better, because, all about geopolitics is all about our national interests, which must be considered. Then Stephen Fury from South Africa also said they got lots of sweet potatoes in South Africa. So if the African continent can speak with one voice or unite in such a way, so much so that we can trade with each other. Now, I wanted to point out something. The African Union went to Putin the other day. The reason why they went to Putin is not for nothing other than the fact that the sanctions that were placed on Russia, the African continent was not considered by the Western Bloc. They never put us into consideration. So what Putin and the African Union had decided was that they were going to look at local currencies settlement. You settle me in your local currency, I settle you in rubles, then we trade in the wheat, right? But the good news is that behind every cloud, there is also a silver lining. At the BRICS summit held, I think the day before yesterday, including of our brothers from South Africa, which they were in attendance virtually all the heads of states were there. They said they were going to launch a new currency that is going to be backed up by commodity. And this, what does this mean? This means that the African countries can have better ways of payments, of making payments, especially to countries with commodities, hereby bypassing the SWIFT and bypassing products that have been sanctioned due to the Western bloc. So I believe as Africans, this is a good time. We have to look inwards and trade with each other. In Lagos here, we see a lot of tomato chips on the streets of Lagos. Why not have South African farmers here in Nigeria planting it, creating employment, job opportunities? I mean, as Africans, we need to look inwards and see how we can speak with a voice and definitely present a common front to the erstwhile colonial masters. I believe with the new alternative currency, with the new payment mechanism, the fiat dollar is just on a ticking time bomb. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. I think so that we have to think in terms of different opportunities. And while you were talking, I was reminded of a young Cameroonian student that I met, an MIT student. He presented, he has done something with cassava and extended its shelf life so that it can be utilized far more and taken out the noxious, the poisonous components. He has a really exciting discovery. In fact, I told him, I said that he's definitely a billionaire of tomorrow. But those are the sorts of people we need to encourage that will do things that will allow cassava to be easily exported as well. There are a lot of opportunities, and I think as Africans, we really, really have to be thinking outside the box in this and other areas. Dr. Azubike?
Thank you, Prof. So thinking about opportunities, so my intervention is coming from two perspectives. One on the opportunity and then the other on how we can then tie up all this into international law and constitutional law, trying to give us the focus again. So I think of education and education tourism. I know that several of our young ones migrate to Russia and Ukraine to study medicine at least. And we saw several African students stranded. How can we maximize the opportunity and have better medical facilities and institutions here in Africa? And then to the panelists, how do we now tie this all into international law framework? What can we do with our constitutions moving forward? Some countries are at the verge of coming up with new constitutions. Do we reflect on what is happening now to find constitutional frameworks that would provide a kind of buffer for Africa going forward in such when such circumstances arise again? How do we deal with this? Thank you.
Yeah, I think you've raised strong issues that strike at the heart of development, because a lot of the things we're talking about are about reframing, redrafting our constitution so that people are at the heart of development, and to ensure that sustainable development is what we're interested, what we actively advocate. So for me, I see that there's certain, will I say behavioral shifts or mind shifts that are actually very necessary in Africa. Because I think I agree. This is one reason why we're having a seminar like this. We need to interrogate some of these things, look at the opportunities, and like you're trying to do, translate them into actionable items, ways in which we can impact in the international community, and ways in which we can impact domestically. Now, I guess, well, Elvis is still here and you are here. The problem I have is very often when you are talking about constitutional revision, you are talking about one Herculean task, like moving Mount Everest. So, I just wonder. I just wonder whether that is going to be the solution in some places. But then, as we talk about that, I look and see that there are some countries that have recently gone through some constitutional changes. So maybe I shouldn't think like a Nigerian, but I should think more positively. You know, but these are things we need to look at. Somebody here, Stephen Fury, you've been very, very active in the chat page. You are saying our food is not as prominent as the European foods. It's trying to look at our own African foods. Yes, that's true. When there's globalization, food is exported. I guess that's probably why wheat is so prevalent in South Africa. Because in a country like mine, please correct me if I'm wrong, if you ban wheat, it's only the people that are really into bread, that, you know, bread and cake, that will be affected. But I do not think a staple diet will be affected, at least with us in West Africa. So do we have, comments? Or I think Professor
I see Professor Levenberg has been to say something.
No, I'm not going to address the issue of the first time I ate cassava, and the second time, and the third, the fourth, and the fifth was on my different visits to Nigeria. So there is a point in the cassava story. Wheat in this part of the world, it's quite common. But that's not what I want to discuss. Look, in 2021, the African Union Commission and the African Union Development Agency worked on with African countries to create a common African position ahead of the Food System Summit. I think because it happened in 2021, that's very unfortunate that we then had, we had Corona, and then we had the war. But there is this realization that the level of food dependence that Africa has is actually uncalled for. Just Sudan, if you look at Sudan, because the whole continent has arable land, but if you look at Sudan, experts say the soil in Sudan, if it can just be revitalized, can feed half the continent. There is that realization. I think these are some of the areas that we should be going into. I will not raise them because I think the AU is already seized with some of these matters. You know, when I was talking about the 3 security areas, I believe that if you deal with this one of food, you are very highly likely not to be concerned with the others, because they will not be cropping as much as they are cropping. We should deal with this issue of food. Now, the other thing about opportunities, there was a lot said about, the European Union, Egypt, and Israel. But what we also don't note is that just prior to that agreement, because there's an MOU that has been signed that involves transferring gas on the pipeline from Israel to Egypt to be liquefied and then delivered to EU. But there was a proposal before that by the president of Tanzania, Samia Suluhu Hassan, proposing basically the same thing. Now, sometimes within the context of opportunities, there could also be other things developing, because we have to ask ourselves, why was the Tanzanian proposal not taken? Because Israel is the one that insisted that they are in the position to do this. Remember that dynamic between Israel and Egypt. So there is a long political history, even in the opportunities, that we should be very careful of. I pause for now.
Thank you very, very much. And
Your
I
head
think
is
that,
correct.
you know, I think it's a nice positive note. And I will quote from the chat where Professor Hakim Ijaya says that the present situation is a lesson for African countries. We're blessed, but we refuse to take advantage of our natural resources. I think we need to do that because, you know, as you were saying, if you do food, it takes care of the rest. I can assure you it doesn't if you have no energy at all. It's just not possible. It's not just possible. The energy aspect will cripple everything else you're doing. And also the absence of infrastructure is also a huge reason that we haven't gone together. So these are issues that we have to interrogate further. Again, always interrogating with the aim of moving forward. So we'll have Dr. Fokala. You want to say something for 1 minute before we round up? I saw your hand up.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a bad habit what I'm trying to do now, but one cannot resist
Please do.
some of the conversations that are coming up. And the point that I want to make is that I don't think this is the first lesson that we are having as a continent. We had COVID right here with us and still here with us. But in most of our cases, we refuse to use what we have as a continent in order to cure this COVID. We relied on vaccines that we ended up importing and growing pharmaceutical companies in different countries. So we continuously get this lesson. My biggest worry with myself and the continent, and I start to myself because we do not learn. We just talk and talk and talk and nothing is being done. There will be another situation tomorrow and we will say another opportunity to learn. But we've forgotten the fact that we've had several opportunities to learn. I hope this will not be the same. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. And I think we should have a conversation on COVID at a different point because I think that actually COVID was good for some of us. I think, for example, that Nigeria attacked COVID pretty decisively in some ways. But, you know, we will go into that later. For me, I think at this point, I said that, yes, we definitely will stop after two hours. And I am very, very grateful to everybody who has been a part of this discussion. I'm really grateful to all our discussants here. I'm really, really grateful to our participants. It has been quite an interactive group right here. We have, and of course, we're going to have this all up on our YouTube channel. I will just call George to generally say thank you and to say anything else about housekeeping. Obviously talk about this society. We'll be happy to have, I know many of you are members here, but those who are not members, please join us. So George, please, can we hear you? Thank you so much to every single participant. Thank you, Dr. Elesomi, Professor Lebakeng, Dr. Fokala, Professor Akinteriwa. Thank you. And
thank
to
you, Prof.
Dan, who's not here. Yes, thanks so much.
Thank you.
So please, let's thank you. So George.
You've said the thank you anyway.
I have, maybe he has problems, and I've said a bit about the Society of International Law. I also will add then that I would be very happy for us to collaborate more because the constitutional worker, lawyers and us can actually do some really great work. I can visualize a lot of great work that we can do together. There's a lot of synergy. Between us, and we can actually realistically tackle some of the problems in the continent and suggest solutions and suggest working relationships. Because at the end of the day, that is what is important. In the course of talking, I forget who talked about the aspects of economic integration that are vital. We are diverse, we are many, but we have some common grounds. And if actually we could integrate better, we could connect with ourselves more, have more infrastructure to move around, actually have a common currency in the way that has been possible in some other places, such as the European Union, for example, and have currencies that are totally convertible. There's so much that we'll be able to do. So there are a lot of prospects for Africa. I remain very, very excited and very, very hopeful about this continent, and pray that we will see the change that we have been looking for. Now, George has, obviously, we probably couldn't talk. He's given us a web link, and also higher up, Ibrahim gave us a link to Professor
Bolaji
Akinyemi's YouTube channel. I didn't know about it, so I surely am going to look at it and listen. So thank you, Professor Akiterua, for mentioning
it. It's every Thursday, 7 p.m.
Okay, that's when it comes on. Okay.
And next Wednesday, actually, he might be talking about Afro currency, which was raised by either my brother Lukala, or I don't know. They are now talking about the need for an African currency, so that all these local currencies we are talking about
will be fully interchangeable.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you very much. So once again,
also, just someone had asked about action points and way forward. Just to chip it out there, that the Nigerian Society of International Law is planning a conference that will be coming up later in the year. And we are going to be, the call for paper will soon be out, and some of these issues would also be on the burner. So we are definitely going on to interrogate it further and better towards trying to concretize our action plans going forward. Yeah, yes. George, over to you, please.
Thank you.
No, my brother Azubuike, all you need to do before going, in the presence of our president, ask Professor Lobakeng Lukala to do papers. You tell them you are going to send their topics to them, so either next week or all along, and then you give them the responsibility. So they begin to work. Well, it's going to be held in November anyway.
Yes, so there's time. So we have invitations. George, note it, we're inviting them, because we really do need to start talking and walking our talk in addition.
Okay.
Thank you very much, everybody. Abibat, lovely comments.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you all the best.
All right, great, thanks.
Thank you, Prof.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you for involving us.
Bye.
Bye. Good night. Good night.